Episode 146. Today we are going to talk about musical discipline. When I say musical discipline, different approaches that musicians use to get to where they want to go as artists. So now, growing up in the public school system, I was always given this kind of prototype that musical discipline meant that everybody had to learn how to read music and had to play in the orchestra and to be able to just play the score, and that made you a great musician. And I think a lot of people still think that. Like to this day, I've been teaching for 35 years, and I still get people that say, "Hey, I don't know how to read, and I need to know how to read, or I won't be able to do anything." And it's like, well, that's only one kind of musician and only one part of musical development. Certainly, some reading is great for you, and in certain doses and the pacing of it. But what I'm here to talk about is there's two different ways in which I view music education, two different musical disciplines that we use in order to get anything done in order to practice. And for better or worse, I classify these as something I think that is recognizable to you. We have the classical discipline, and then we have the jazz discipline. Now these have nothing, well, I say nothing to do with, it's not classical and jazz. We have lots of different kinds of music. Classical discipline refers to the discipline of playing something exactly the way the composer wanted it to be played. If you're playing an orchestra, if you're playing, a lot of times in classical music, the conductor doesn't want to hear your interpretation of an orchestral piece. If you're the violin player, that's understandable. That would be unrealistic. Classical music, play what's on the script, what's written on the page, nothing more, or else it's going to sound horrible. We understand that. On the other end of things, we have the jazz discipline, which is about freedom, which is about being able to improvise, which is about talking about groove and talking about being able to manipulate melody on the fly. So my view of all of this is both are important. But here is the deal. I think that one of them gets neglected a lot in music education. And the one that gets neglected still in public schools, there's not that many people, not that many high school music teachers, middle school music teachers, whatever school grade music teachers teaching improvisation. You can teach improvisation to kids and adults of all ages. I've taught improvisation in dance. I've taught improvisation in melody and singing and rhythms to nursery schoolers. Okay, it can be done, but it isn't being done in a lot of things. So both are important. Okay, so the classical discipline, basically, when we're talking about the classical approach, it is rooted in this one central mission. And that mission is to recreate a piece of music in exactly the original way that the composer intended. Every note is accounted for. And that's understandable. And that's understandable. But that isn't all that there is to being able to play a musical instrument. Okay? So, on the other hand, we have jazz. Jazz is about spontaneity, knowing the language so thoroughly that you're able to manipulate the melody, the rhythm, the chord changes, the groove. You're able to be elastic. You're able to spin out different melodies based on a core melody. You're able to do all these different things to adapt to any musical situation. So for people who have a jazz background, the jazz approach of music education is a superpower. All the studio musicians of the 50s and 60s, a lot of them could read music as well, but all of these guys could adapt because they had the adaptive muscles that was improvisation. Okay, so you find yourself adapting and recreating and studying melody and how do I improvise that and what is the makings of a melody, the chord tones, you have scale tones, you have chromatic passing tones, these things called enclosures are cool in jazz. Um, all these different motifs, call and response are words that we use. These are things that only appear in jazz text that can be used in all text, okay, when we're talking about the teaching and when we value the teaching of improvisation. So improvisation is important when you're taking up a musical instrument, when you're taking up the guitar. I would think that you want to learn how to improvise your favorite, your best guitar players out there. If we think about the best guitar players out there, like in rock, we'll just say in rock, we have the Eddie Van Halens, we have the Jimi Hendrixes, we have the Jimmy Pages, we have, who are the icons, okay? All of these people could improvise. It was not an optional skill. It was a survival skill, okay? It was something that you needed, that ability was what was needed in order for you to be great, for you to be exceptional. You could not be exceptional without the ability to improvise. You learn about theory, but the reason we learn about theory is so we can say, how far can we take this out and it still sound good? Or how can we go beyond what we know, normal stuff, normal sounds, okay? Like when we talk about jazz, a lot of the, how do we use dissonance to our favor, in our favor, okay? Sometimes the bad notes, the blue notes, we call them. The blue notes are the ones that make the sound, the music sound real. How do we do that? These are decisions, and these are things that jazz musicians use. Now, when I say musical disciplines, I'm not saying that there are only two kinds of music, jazz and classical. What I'm saying, there are two different kinds of approaches that you can use in order to learn your musical instrument. Okay, the classical, say you want to be a rock guitar player and that's all you aspire for. So the classical approach is what happens when we copy licks from our favorite player. The jazz approach is when we take that lick and we try to come up with 1,000 different ways to recreate it and repurpose it. And we play that lick that we learned from Eric Clapton and use it in a Lady Gaga application or whatever, okay? When the jazz-based person learns how to, or thinks about, and I'm speaking only in jazz discipline, I'm not talking about jazz music, that's another story. When we learn how to, when we take copy from other people, the reason we're copying from other people is we want to build vocabulary. We want it to be effortless. We want it to be unlimited stuff in our musical bank. Okay, so one of the things that makes learning really fun is to copy what other people have done, and it's like in every solo you can imagine, you're gonna hear somebody do something that you never thought of, and those are learning experiences. This is something that a lot of jazz people still do to this day. And I'm saying jazz discipline, what they do is they play along with recordings and trying to soak in different licks and phrasing ideas and all these kinds of things that you can take from other musicians. Okay, so with that said, how do we do this? Now it gets a little sticky because every high school has a jazz band, but the jazz band has scores that don't have, like you have a bass. You have the bass music, and the bass music has every note written out and no chord changes. You're not teaching jazz at all. You're teaching classical. That's not jazz at all. It's actually hurting your jazz abilities to learn how to play music that way. Okay, what the student needs to do in order to play and really learn jazz is learn how to walk that bass line, how to sound like James Jamerson in that funky bass part without necessarily copying him exactly note for note. He needs to check out Milt Hinton and Ron Carter and their walking bass approaches and get those things in his ears or hers. I got many bass students that are girls as well. Um, and get those notes in your ears and learn to speak the language. So you start by imitating, and then you put it all in your stew, and then you innovate. But in order to do this, what you want to do is you don't just want to read the music. That's a classical approach. All right, that's not teaching anybody about jazz at all. Jazz equates to improvisation, to be able to, and there's even the band directors, and most band directors know what I'm saying is true, to their credit. There is not enough time and resources spent on people to teach them these jazz-based approaches. And here's another thing. You think about the earliest jazz musicians. The earliest jazz musicians weren't copying jazz. They played all music. They grabbed from every style of music there is. That's high agency. They're high agency musicians. They grab from everything. They grab from work songs. They grab from spirituals. They grab from the blues, W.C. Handy, and they grab from even minstrelsy. There's elements of minstrel music of the 1800s. They grab from some of the syncopation of ragtime, the earliest jazz musicians. And then they took all that stuff and they put it in a blender, and they were joyfully playing with it. Okay? They weren't this bit of musical elitism that all we're trying to do is recreate the sound of Herbie Hancock 1965, because guess what? Herbie Hancock in 2025 is not trying to sound like that. Herbie Hancock 2025 is constantly growing, constantly bringing things in. This is why a lot of jazz people who think of themselves as jazz players are really treating the jazz music as if it were a classical form. That you're good as long as you sound like Art Blakey, or you're good as long as you sound like Herbie Hancock or Wayne Shorter. But at the minute you take in an influence what those guys wouldn't take in, then somehow you're cheapening the music, and I don't agree with that. So in my teaching, again, jazz versus classical, in order to be high agency and to be fully adaptable, you have to expose yourself to wide music, a wide scope of music. And then it's all about the mixtures of these things. The best players. Name me a Guthrie Govan. Can play everything. He's drawing from so many different styles. Okay. So many different styles. Eddie Van Halen started with the blues and garage band music, and started with Eric Clapton. He learned by learning Clapton solos, and then he went south. He just started learning from everybody. Okay. Same with Wes Montgomery. Wes Montgomery was Charlie Christian. Those were his gods. He learned those things note for note for note. But then at some point he cut the rope. All right. So, and he brought in all different kinds of music. Pop music. He did Latin music. He did blues and jump blues, and he did hard bop, and he did all kinds of stuff. Okay. Anything that he could incorporate into his guitar, he would. All right. So from classical music, we learn accuracy, we learn refinement, and we learn kind of a devotion to detail. All of this is good. All of this is good for the rock musician. This accuracy and refinement and devotion to detail. When you're playing a guitar riff, there are certain times when you're playing that guitar riff that if it's not done exactly the way it is wrong, and your band is not going to sound tight. Sometimes playing exactly the way it is, it's like that, the idea of a clenched fist of tightness. Some riffs are that way. Hair of the Dog by Nazareth, or I'm trying to think of some other ones. A Whole Lot of Love by Led Zeppelin, Purple Haze. Play it the way it is. Play it the way it is. It's not going to sound tight unless you certain things. Other things are improvisational. From jazz, we gain the spontaneity. We gain adaptability. Remember that improvisation is a superpower. It is super. It's like super muscular. Okay, it's creative, and it takes a certain amount of courage to get into it because you're playing stuff that you got to cut the rope. Cutting the rope means you're leaving home. You're no longer doing what somebody else is telling you to do. Okay? But that's where greatness comes from. So anyway, so beyond all the replication, in order to be a master of music, my kind of music is, it combines all these different styles. I call it boom pop. Boom pop, I don't use the words jazz in terms of a musical style, because what we want to do is not just sound like jazz musicians. We want to sound like a full musician. We want to take from jazz. We want to borrow from jazz timing and all that, but use that as one of our ingredients, not our sole ingredient. Okay, so we replicate somebody else. We learn to replicate somebody else, but then that's the first step. That is not the final goal. From there, you innovate and you learn how to speak the language yourself, and you be conversive in it. Okay, that idea of being untethered. You're not tied to anything. That is what it means to be a musical master. Stevie Wonder. You ever heard of Stevie Wonder playing giant steps? Check it out on YouTube. Don't for a second think that he's just a pop musician. Okay, so cut the rope, innovate, try something new. This should be a part of your daily routine as a musician. I'll see you next time. Hi, this is Rod from Boomer Guitar Sessions. I personally wanted to thank you for being part of our community. If you like what we're doing here and you want to see more of it, please hit the like, subscribe, and share. And this helps me spread my musical messages to all over the world. Thank you. I appreciate you. And always remember, you can do